Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and I've got a really good show planned out for today. But, folks, the moment is finally here. We have spring training baseball. It was incredibly wonderful to see over the weekend the spring training action, see guys back out on the field, see fans in the stands. I was able to only catch a little bit of the action, but nonetheless, it's good to see the guys back out on the field. The weather here in Pittsburgh is changing a little bit, so things are definitely on the up and up here, which is always a good thing. I mean, as I'm recording this, it's a sunny day, and it's probably, I would say, the second or third sunny day that we've had in Pittsburgh in the last month, and that's not an exaggeration. But anyways, hope everyone is staying healthy and safe and is getting really excited for more baseball action as the spring training time ramps up. And we got, kind of get into the thick of the season and whatnot. But anyways, let's dive into this episode. And I want to first jump right into the latest news going around the MLB and discuss any free agency updates that have occurred over the past few days as well. Later on, I'll get into sharing the moves teams have made, or should have made, I should say, during the offseason, and I'll highlight where they might have missed out on improving their lineup. Afterwards, I'll get into discussing which free agents on their new teams are going to have the best seasons this year with the value that they bring to those teams. I'll share the teams they are on, but also why I think they can have breakout years in their new roles. And then be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into discussing the moves teams will regret making this year and what the consequences could be of these moves being made. So a lot of things going on, mostly about kind of moves and how teams are going to adjust with these new players, and if there's going to be any regrets, any consequences, any pleasant surprises, so on and so forth, because now we're starting to inch closer and closer to opening day. So I'll get into a little bit of free agency news to get things started, and then I'll get into a little recap of the last couple days of spring training and whatnot. But the market has been quiet, with teams reporting to camp and things kind of picking up, if you will. But there's still been some moves made towards the latter part of the week last week, and I'll go through a couple of them just to highlight. First and foremost, Tyler Clifford signed a one-year, $2.25 million deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks. I think this is a great get for the Diamondbacks. Very effective reliever, somebody who's actually, although some might say he has fallen on hard times as a player, I would argue that. I mean, he's still been very productive. I think he's been quietly productive. They add him. They also add Joakim Soria to their bullpen, so that could be two huge, sneaky moves. I mean, they lost Archie Bradley in free agency. He's now over with the Phillies. And so it makes me wonder, okay, Soria and now Clifford are stepping into those new roles for Arizona, and this is a team that was not very good coming out of the bullpen last year. They finished 18th in team ERA by their bullpen in 2020, so the Diamondbacks were looking to kind of rejuvenate that a little bit, and I think getting Soria, a former All-Star, getting Clifford, a former All-Star, two guys that, again, they're nowhere near the level of Hall of Fame players, right? They're not going to go down as one of the greats of all time, but they're two players that are very effective. They do a lot of really good things. They're experienced. And I think that's another thing that this Diamondbacks team needs to have a little bit more of, some more veteran leadership. And, I mean, the Diamondbacks, for the most part, they were pretty quiet outside those two moves. And, I mean, obviously getting Asdrubal Cabrera, that is good. So getting a little bit more veteran hitting. You might want to surround, again, some of that younger talent with those veterans, kind of help them and guide them a little bit. I mean, Ketel Marte, he's not necessarily somebody that is a seasoned veteran. He hasn't been around the league for a long time. But they have, oddly enough, some decent pieces, Cole Calhoun, David Peralta, that potentially could actually do a lot of wonders for this Diamondbacks team. But I just don't know if that's going to really do anything this year. I don't think these moves are going to put them in the playoff conversation. I mean, maybe they will. But, again, I think that there is a lot more that the Diamondbacks need to address. Some starting pitching, obviously. I think that they might need a little bit of more hitting for the most part. But definitely addressing that bullpen area was a smart move by them. Because Clifford, he pitched really well for the Twins last year. He had a 2.77 ERA. He has a career 3.1 ERA. So again, somebody who's been efficient his entire career, so that's always something that can really help out this Diamondbacks team. But then some other moves, Cameron Maybin re-signs with the Cubs. Solid move, I think, to help give an extra arm in the outfield for the Cubs with Jason Hayward, Ian Happ, and Jock Peterson, because let's face it, right? Jock Peterson, no disrespect to him, very good hitter, great power hitter. He's been above 800 for an OPS for most of his career, I would say. Not a great fielder. And Maybin is a very good fielder, so he could be somebody that kind of spells Peterson every now and again if, let's say, Peterson is struggling from the plate and in the field. And he's a pretty, I would say, again, productive player. He's not light years ahead of everybody. He's not going to be an MVP candidate, but he batted .250 last year when he got traded over to the Cubs. And he's going to be a nice piece, I think, in the outfield. He might be kind of a sneaky player that could really help them out down the road. And I'm sure that, as time goes on, and again, Peterson, who knows if he's going to be that good of a fielder this year because he has not played in the field for a full season in over a year. So that's definitely going to probably throw some guys off that aren't very good fielders, guys like Jock Peterson, Kyle Schwarber, guys that haven't been used to playing in the field much. This might be a little bit of a rude awakening playing 162 games every day and starting in the outfield. So look to see Maybin possibly sneak his way into the starting lineup at some point. I think he's going to be a good get for them. But then also some other moves. Mitch Moreland signed with the Oakland Athletics on a one-year, $2.5 million deal. I think this is a great get for the Athletics. I mean, I've been saying this for months. They need some power, and they desperately need it. Just outside of Matt Olson, outside of Matt Chapman, they don't have really any other, I would say, heavy hitters to go to in a time where you need a run to be scored. Mitch Moreland, he brings that. He's a power bat, and especially with Chris Davis not being there anymore, I think Moreland can really fill that DH role very well. He's a decent fielder, right? I mean, his fielding has seen a decline. He's an overall still okay fielder, but his fielding has definitely taken a little bit of a dip. But Matt Olson, he's one of the best fielding first basemen in baseball. So I don't think there's going to be any worry with having to put Moreland over at first because, again, you can just strictly DH him. And I think that's going to be something that really helps him out because let's look at last year. He was with the Boston Red Sox, so in the AL where the DH is possible, and he was hitting great. I mean, he was above 300, having a great season. He goes to San Diego, and he sees a massive dip in his production. So I'm not going to try and speculate, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to just say this right now. He clearly seems to be like a guy that wants to strictly hit, right? Kind of a similar situation with, say, a guy like Jesse Winker, right? Last year, he had a great season as a DH, but in years before that, he wasn't that great because he had to play in the field. Last year, because of the universal DH, it allowed guys that weren't having to play in the field so much really, I think, expand their offensive game. And Mitch Moreland was one of those guys. And I think that now the Athletics have a formidable bat, a scary bat in their lineup that will produce some power. He's not great against lefties, so that is the one concern. I mean, certain matchups might not look so great for the Athletics if they put Moreland in at designated hitter, but let's face it, right? He brings a lot of power. Last year he batted .265, he had 10 homers and 29 RBIs, so a pretty solid, efficient stat line, hits much better against righties, and I think that the A's, again, they continue to minimize the spending. They build accomplished teams because they don't go out and spend an arm and a leg and more for certain players. And honestly, this is going to sound crazy, but I think that's actually a great way of going about it because look at teams that have paid an astronomical amount of money to certain players and they just don't pan out. And so you wind up wasting money on guys that do not play well. And then, you're still tied up with having to pay them. Maybe you have to buy them out of their contract, trade them for maybe less than what you got initially with that player. So the way the Athletics do it is, hey, you know what? We're going to sign guys to 1 to 2 year deals. We're not going to pay them much, so if they don't play well, it's not like we're losing $40 million, say like the Dodgers, who, if Bauer is not good this year, could definitely be losing $40 million. And so there's not a whole lot of, I think, risk in doing that. Now, again, on the other part of it, they're not going to make, I think, huge World Series runs. These are very kind of small, minute moves. But who knows? Maybe there's a year where they wind up having kind of a success story like the Tampa Bay Rays have had in previous years. So I'm very curious to see how Moreland does in Oakland. But overall, a lot of very interesting moves still being made. There's still a couple guys out on the free agency wire. I mean, you've got Maikel Franco, who is yet to re-sign with a team. And quite frankly, I don't know how he hasn't done that yet. You've got Jackie Bradley Jr., got some players that are still out there that could definitely be swooped up and taken for this upcoming season, but they're also kind of getting into, spring training now, getting out of the free agency frenzy, if you will. there are a few players who have, I think, seen some early action in spring training with their old or same teams, but have a deeper appreciation for playing. It was actually very interesting how there was some very interesting storylines going around the first couple days of spring training, and some of these players were recognized for their return to the sport that they love. First things first, Trey Mancini, he made an incredible comeback, and I don't know if anybody saw it, but it was very warming to see the standing ovation he got. Came back after having stage 3 colon cancer. After, again, I mean, he got wind of that after his 2019 year, a huge year for him. He was an all-star, has to sit out all of last year and can't play because he was going through chemotherapy and radiation and so on and so forth. But now he has come back. He was welcomed with a standing ovation, and he actually was quoted saying he almost teared up with all of the appreciation of the fans and teammates and even the opposing team and fans for the opposing team giving him kind of a warm standing ovation to welcome him back. And he did single in his first at-bat back as well. So that's, again, progressing in the right direction. And the Orioles are hoping that he's going to continue to steadily improve and kind of gradually build himself up. So then once opening day happens, he can be playing every single day by mid-March, and there won't be any setbacks. But then another guy that also had a very scary situation occur with him in the offseason, Tommy Pham. He's come back after an offseason filled with fear, as I think a lot of us would probably call it. He was involved in a stabbing incident that required surgery for the San Diego Padres player and 100 stitches to his lower back. And actually, the doctor that performed that surgery said that if there wasn't an extra layer of muscle and he wasn't such a fit individual, he might have had a very, very unfortunate outcome, if we will, in that situation if he did not have that extra, I guess, cushioning or whatever it might have been. I'm not quite sure, but he said he felt very lucky to be alive and back playing baseball. He commented he wanted to build, on last year's poor performance that he had. I was reading a very interesting article about him. He's a big-time stat guy, and he really reads heavy into a lot of the stats, really likes to break down and analyze his game big time. And so he was talking about how, last year batting .211 with a .624 OPS and negative defensive run saved, that's not the player that he is. And I agree. I think Tommy Pham is a good baseball player, and I think that ultimately this Padres team, I mean, let's face it, this Padres team is just beyond stacked at this point. And if Tommy Pham is kind of, in my opinion, possibly a reserve player on this team, that's an issue for other teams, right? I mean, you've got guys like Pham coming off the bench, and he could immediately do damage, right? He could be a guy that comes in and pinch hits, pinch runs, and he can have an incredible impact on the game. And actually what's also very interesting is that Pham had a big part in the trade that sent Blake Snell over to San Diego. The GM of the Padres, A.J. Preller, actually called him. He called Tommy Pham up and asked him about Blake Snell, tried to persuade him, and then Pham said, absolutely, you need to go out and get this guy. And one thing led to another, and then all of a sudden that trade happened. So an interesting instance where we see a player having a big-time say or big-time input on a kind of a front office managerial decision, if you will. And I think that's, again, a great sign that players are starting to have a little bit more of a say in who's on their team, and rightfully so. I think there should be some sort of conversation or communication from the management people and from everybody in the front office saying, hey, this is who we want to have on our team. What do you guys think, right? Or who do you think should be in this situation? Who do you think we should add here? And I think it's going to be a very special year for two players who have clearly seen some major setbacks and are kind of on the verge of some major redemption stories as well. I mean, Mancini fighting cancer, stage 3 colon cancer, so nothing, something that's very scary, no joke to mess around with. And he's come back and he seems to be in good spirits and good health. And then Pham, I mean, nearly losing his life in a stabbing incident, having 100 stitches. I couldn't even imagine 100 stitches in my back. And he's come back full force, ready to rock and roll. So that's a lot of really positive things, I think, from the first couple days of spring training. But actually, speaking of spring training, let's just wrap up this segment just sharing a couple players that have early on caught my eye in particular and my attention and that I think are playing pretty well very early on in this spring training. So going back to Sunday, Keston Hiura, he had a great game on Sunday against the White Sox, a 3-run homer. Gregory Polanco for the Pirates, he had a 3-run homer on Sunday versus the Orioles. Miguel Sano, which was really good to see Sano back in the kind of his old self, if you will. He had a 2-run double on Sunday versus the Red Sox. Austin Meadows, again, another guy that after a great 2019 saw some major setbacks in 2020. He had a 2-run home run on Sunday versus the Braves. And then Monday, I mean, Gary Sanchez, he absolutely sent a missile out to center field of a home run. He had a huge home run on Monday versus the Tigers. Trevor Bauer was also on the mound in his Dodgers debut, struck out 2 Dodgers in that debut. Looked really good, too. I mean, his curveball was humming. There was a couple of replays of it on SportsCenter, and I mean, that's a scary curveball because it breaks at the very last second. His movement is insane. If I'm not mistaken, he had one of the top spin rates in all of baseball last year. So he's a guy that not only he'll definitely pump some serious heat, but at the same time, he's got great off-speed stuff, and as a result, he can really fool a lot of guys from the plate. And then also Shohei Ohtani, he went 2 for 3 on Monday versus the White Sox. So good to have him back in the lineup, especially if you're the Angels. And he's a very interesting case, right? He's somebody that can do a little bit of everything. He can hit, he can field, and he's a really good pitcher. And that's what makes him so unique, is that you can have him as a pitcher but also a hitter. Me personally, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think you should just have him stick to one or the other. I think that versatility could actually hurt him because we've seen in the past he has been injury-ridden. He's had issues with his arm, with his shoulder. And let's face it, when you're pitching and then you're hitting, it's 2 totally different motions on your body, but you're using somewhat of the same muscle groups. And so I can see why there might be an extra wear and tear here, an extra wear and tear there, because that's a lot of torque on your arm over and over again, especially if, let's say, one day he's pitching and the next day they say, hey, we're putting you in the lineup. That's a quick turnaround, especially if he throws 80-plus pitches on a Tuesday and then he goes up to the plate and bats for 4 different at-bats the next day on a Wednesday. That's a very quick turnaround. So it was good to see him kind of back into the full swing of things, if you will. But overall, first couple days of spring training, again, I'm recording this on Tuesday, March 2nd, so a whole bunch more of baseball to come our way. And we've got just about a month until opening day, so I'm very excited. I actually just saw and got wind that the Pittsburgh Pirates are going to be allowing fans into the stands this year, which is a very exciting thing for me personally because I love going to baseball games. I'm not necessarily a huge Pirates fan, but I love going to PNC Park. So when I saw that, I texted a bunch of friends and I said, hey, we've got to make sure we go to PNC Park this year. We cannot miss out on that. I think the capacity is 20%. And the Pennsylvania state governor said it was 20% outside capacity for sporting venues and then 15% for inside sporting venues. So hopefully by the time summer rolls around, that 20% maybe goes up a little bit more. But all in all, some really good stuff. And I think the news segment on the GSMC Baseball podcast for my episodes are going to start changing a little bit with all the games that are going to be coming up. Definitely going to share some of the top performers of the week, share some of the highlights of the week as well, and just some of the standout players overall from spring training and as we work our way into the opening day on April 1st. And then once that happens, it's going to be full force, all of the updates and latest rundowns in the entire league from what goes on from that point moving forward. So, folks, that's going to do it for us in our first segment, but don't go anywhere because when I get back from the commercial break, I'm going to get into the moves that teams should have made this offseason and where these teams may have gone wrong during the offseason. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I got into some of the recent news going around the league, but also gave a little update on spring training and shared some top performers through the first couple days down in Florida. But make sure you stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into the different moves made by teams that those teams will most likely regret making in the offseason. I want to now get into sharing what moves certain teams should have made and why they weren't made, and what might be on the horizon for them this season since those particular moves were not carried out. So, I want to first start out in the NL Central with the St. Louis Cardinals. This is a team that I feel they made one huge move, arguably one of the biggest moves in all of free agency, and that was it. Very, very, I would say, lackluster after getting Arenado. And what I think they really missed out on was getting more help in the outfield. They had a combined .210 hitting between Harrison Bader, Dexter Fowler, and Tyler O'Neill last year, coming from their outfield. That's not good. That's not playoff baseball, if you ask me. They eked their way into the playoffs last year because the NL Central was not very good. I mean, let's face it, the Brewers made it on a losing record, so they did not have a whole lot of competition to go up against. And they lose Dexter Fowler, and they don't really make any adds in the outfield. Now, let's face it. Dexter Fowler, he was not going to get the job done from the plate. He's already actually, I feel like, has struggled a little bit early on in spring training with the Angels. But the hitting is just non-existent out in the outfield. And I think that, they don't have much on their bench either, right? They don't have anybody that's going to come off the bench and is going to be, very effective. No one who played in at least 10 games in a reserve role last year batted above .250. So they have no help in terms of outfield hitting and depth hitting either. I mean, they have literally none. And sure, bringing in Arenado was a big deal. I mean, we all knew that was going to be a huge move. I mean, the Rockies had discussed shopping him around and possibly dealing him, and they did. And, I mean, they had to give $50 million over to the Cardinals just to pay a little bit of that humongous contract he has. But it was one of the top-heavy moves in baseball, meaning, they brought in a huge, talented guy with a whole lot of ability, and then after that, they didn't do anything at all. And I think Dylan Carlson is young and could become a solid future outfielder for them. But Bader and O'Neill are average at best hitters, but they are good fielders, and they are good base runners. I will give them that. I just feel like this is a team that it really relies on Goldschmidt and Arenado. And I wonder if this team is going to kind of have a similar effect that the Nationals had last year, where they only have two guys that really do anything, and then everybody else is bad. Everybody else is literally a non-factor on that team. And I think what's going to be also very interesting to see is just if anybody else can step up in the lineup. I mean, they only had 3 players last year bat above .250 in the starting lineup. Again, I mentioned off the bench, but in the starting lineup, they didn't even have anybody that was an impactful hitter, and one of those players is gone in Colton Wong. And so I feel like, yes, they did kind of address some of the infield issues, but it was only at the third base position, right? Wong is a shortstop, second base guy, a middle infielder, and I think that, they did kind of, I would say, fix that hole a little bit. I mean, things are still leaking in the outfield, and it's not getting any better. So I think they're going to regret not getting any outfield hitting. I mean, let's face it. Look at a team like the Chicago Cubs. They went out and got Jock Peterson for a 1-year, $8 million deal. I think that they went into this so heavy with wanting Arenado and wanting to make a huge splash that they kind of handcuffed themselves, and they couldn't spend it all after that. They actually went over their budget that they had initially set out for, and so as a result, I think it set them back a little bit for the rest of their off-season spending, and it kind of hand-tied them with what they could do. They could only get Arenado, and again, they had to have help from another team to try and pay off some of this huge contract he has. So I think they're going to regret not getting any more help out in the outfield, but then another team that is going to be a contender, they will be good, but I do question if this is going to affect their long-term run towards the playoffs and once they get into the playoffs, because I guarantee you this team will make the playoffs unless something just drastic happens in the next 3 months. But the Blue Jays getting more starting pitching, I just don't think that they did that. They finished in the bottom half in the MLB last year in team ERA with a 4.6 total ERA, and outside of Hyun-Jin Ryu, they don't have anybody really to rely on. They added Tommy Malone on a minor league deal, but he's coming off a year where he was absolutely rocked, both in Baltimore and Atlanta. He had a 6.6 ERA, a 1.56 whip, which is horrendous, and in 39 innings as well. So who knows if he'll even make the roster, if he'll even make the 40-man active roster. They added Robbie Ray. I mean, he's got potential, but he wasn't impressive overall last year, right? I mean, when he went from the Diamondbacks to the Blue Jays, actually, that's when he, saw a little bit of an improvement. But after that, I mean, it still wasn't great. His ERA wasn't even below 4. Before he was in Arizona, it was above 7. So it did drop down significantly, but it was still not that great. The only other pitcher in their starting rotation that had a sub-3 ERA, other than Hyun-Jin Ryu from last year, is Tawan Walker, and he's not even on the team anymore. And I just feel like Tanner Roark, who had a 6.8 ERA in 2020, Matt Shoemaker, he had a 4.7, so hovering around 5 in 2020. They're, for the most part, what is left from last year's starting rotation. And I think that Chase Anderson also being gone freed up another spot on their rotation. He did not have a very good year either. I mean, if you looked at their starting rotation from a year ago, it would be a big head-scratcher as to how they even found themselves in the playoffs. And I think what set them back from going far into the playoffs is the same thing that the White Sox ran into. No depth of pitching. You can only do so much with all the hitting in the world. It's kind of the old, saying defense wins championships, right? And I know it's a very cliche thing to say in sports, but again, let's remind everybody, the offense will only do so much, because if your defense allows the other team to score just as many runs, if not more, it's not going to really make a difference if your offense put up a lot of runs that day, because your defense could not hold the other team. So I think that they had a lot of addressing to do with the starting pitching. I will say they did do a nice job with the relief pitching for the most part. Obviously getting some hitting and getting George Springer is a huge add, but I just don't know if they added enough starting pitching to be a World Series team. Their hitting is going to make them a big-time playoff contender, and honestly a team that I could see possibly winning the AL East and maybe even winning the AL and going to the World Series. But in terms of actually going and getting to the World Series, and if they were to get there, winning it and going far and competing, I just don't know if they've got the pitching to do that. And I think they're going to regret not getting more starting pitching. I mean, let's face it, a guy like Jake Odorizzi would have been perfect to go get. And they probably can't go and get him because they've got, a lot of money tied up with George Springer. And they did make some other moves as well. But I think that they were going to definitely, they're going to be kicking themselves by the end of the year that they didn't get more starting pitching. And another team in the same division that I think is going to really regret not getting more starting pitching is the Tampa Bay Race. Very similar to the Blue Jays. They did not add any starting pitching back, and the Blue Jays, they didn't really lose a whole lot of starting pitching. At least they didn't lose much impactful starting pitching, I would say. I mean, Chase Anderson didn't really do anything that special. Taijuan Walker was a very, very important piece to their success, but, I mean, outside of that, it wasn't really a whole lot that was lost. It was just nothing was gained. But the Rays, they lost a lot, and they didn't really gain anything that special. They lost Blake Snell and Charlie Morton, and they do bring back Ryan Yarbrough, and I do like Ryan Yarbrough. I think he had a solid 2020 season, 3.5 ERA, 44 Ks. He was third on the team actually in Ks, and he was second on the team in innings pitched with 55. So clearly he's a guy that is going to be very successful, right? And I know that they went out, they added Chris Archer, but we haven't seen much of Chris Archer. For the time that he was in Pittsburgh, he wasn't active the whole time. He was injured, and when he was playing, he was not very good. He was not good. He is a strikeout or home run pitcher. It's one or the other. And I don't know if this is going to be the same Chris Archer that had the career years he had in Tampa Bay before he left and went to Pittsburgh, where he was striking out 225 guys. He was absolutely just lighting guys up left and right. I don't know if that's the same Chris Archer that we've seen in previous years. And it's a limited payroll, so I really didn't see them getting anyone huge, obviously. But you trade away Snell, and I don't think they should have done that. But, again, they make interesting moves all the time, and somehow it works out for them. So they must know something that I don't, clearly, because they're in the position to make the team. So, as a result, I can only look at it from the outside point of view. They did add Rich Hill, and I think that's a good add for some veteran pitching. But you go on and get a guy like Michael Wacha, who we're going to hear about in a little bit here. I'm not a big fan of Wacha. I don't think he's that good. I mean, now you've replaced Snell and Morton with guys like Rich Hill, who I will say is very comparable to Charlie Morton for the most part, although I think that Morton is a little bit of a better playoff pitcher. I mean, let's face it, he's been one of the best playoff pitchers the last couple years. But then you also replace them with a guy like Chris Archer, who is, I think, on the last leg of his career. And then you also get a guy like Michael Wacha, who is coming off a horrendous year, and ever since 2016, he's only had 1 year where his ERA was below 4. Every other year, it's been well above it. So I don't know, if they have the pitching that can make them that successful team they were last year. And again, they went to the World Series, and I'm going to give them all the credit in the world for doing that, right? It was a 60-game season, and even for the Dodgers, even for a lot of the teams that went to the playoffs, 60 games is a small sample size of what an entire season would be like. A lot of teams, after 60, 70, 80, 90, even 100 games, they start to fall apart. We've seen it time and time again where teams have these horrendous second-half collapses after the All-Star break, this, that, and the other, and they can't bring themselves out of that hole. And so I do wonder that if it had been a full season, would the Rays have gone to the World Series? Would they have been as successful as they were last year? Would the Dodgers have gone to the World Series? That's another question. I mean, who knows? We could have seen the Padres and the Yankees all of a sudden just turn up the notch, come the 80, 90 game mark if there had been a full season, and we would not be talking about the Rays and the Dodgers in the World Series at all. So I think the Rays, they should have gone out and gotten more pitching. Maybe what they're hoping is that some of these guys do perform well. They can trade them for younger talent that could maybe benefit them, maybe not necessarily this year, but the following year. So it's something to monitor. It's something definitely to pay attention to. But another team that I think is going to regret some of the lack of the moves that they made in the offseason are the Rockies, not adding more hitting. I mean, plain and simple, they didn't add much, and they got rid of quite a bit, right? I don't think, getting rid of Arenado was a terrible idea because I know that he wasn't happy. He was owed a lot of money, so it was smart for them to deal him, and they don't have to pay that astronomical contract. Yeah, they did have to fork over $50 million to the St. Louis Cardinals, but you know what? Now you don't have to worry about that huge pay hit every single year. They also lost Daniel Murphy to retirement, but Daniel Murphy was on the absolute last leg of his career. I mean, he was very successful. I will give him that. He had a lot of success, but it was kind of the end of his career. You could kind of tell. Tony Walters also not there anymore. They do bring back Elias Diaz, who I really like. I think Diaz is a very good catcher / first baseman, however you want to float him around. David Dahl also did not bring him back. So 3 players who are capable of hitting. Murphy, again, was a little bit older, and Walters not as much. But David Dahl was an all-star in 2019. So that is something to pay attention to. How are they going to kind of bounce back from losing that hitting, but also losing a guy like Arenado? That's a huge, huge void in that lineup. And they have a lot of prospects coming up. I'm going to give them that. They've got a lot of, I think, potential successful years ahead of them with the players that they have coming up through their farm system. But I could see maybe why they tried to free cap space up, maybe because they want to try and keep guys like Trevor Story around. I mean, Story's going to be a free agent after this season. So come the offseason of 2021, 2022, he's going to be up for grabs. And so maybe they were thinking, hey, you know what? Arenado's not really in for the long haul. He's not really happy. We're paying him way too much money. We might as well just ship him off somewhere. We can save a lot of money, and maybe we can convince Trevor Story to stick around. And maybe you can build a little bit of a talented team around him and take some of that younger talent that they have brewing in their farm system and bring them up and really try and surround him with some better players. I will say they did have some pleasant surprises last year. Raimel Tapia, he had a very good year for them, batted .321 in 51 games. And then obviously Charlie Blackmon helps out tremendously there. But I just don't think that there was enough hitting added back to the team after all of the loss that there was with Arenado not being there. But again, Arenado makes up a good bit of that lost hitting. And I think that also with Ian Desmond not being there, that's another power bat in the lineup that won't be, for right now, be with the team and playing. So that could also hinder them. So I just don't know what to think of this team. I think that, if they try to convince Story to stick around, they're going to have to really build a winning team around him. And they're going to have to go out and get that personnel to do that. But in order to do that, they're going to have to either trade or go out and spend quite a bit of money to try and bring in that talent, because let's face it, it's going to come with a cost. So I definitely think they'll regret not adding more hitting to their lineup. And then also I think the Red Sox is another team that I feel like they didn't add enough hitting in the outfield. And I know that's kind of ironic because they do add Hunter Renfroe, and Hunter Renfroe does have the potential to go off for 30-plus homers. But let's face it, you also traded away Andrew Benintendi, and I feel like they held on to Andrew Benintendi for well too long. They tried to give him time and time again, chance and chance again, and he just does not seem to fit the bill for them. And then they have not re-signed Jackie Bradley Jr. And who knows where he'll land? Maybe he re-signs with them, but I don't think so. I will say, and I remember when they made a trade for Mookie Betts to go to the L.A., and then they got Alex Verdugo in exchange. A friend of mine that is a huge Red Sox fan was absolutely livid by that, and I get that. It was the year after they won the World Series, I believe. I think Betts was the MVP that year in the AL, and he kind of saw the Alex Verdugo acquirement, and he was not happy about that. And I remember Verdugo had a really good year that year, and I said, hey, man, he's going to be good. He's going to be a very, very good player. You might be having somebody that you could keep on your team for the next 10 years, and you could build a team around him. And sure enough, he batted .308 last year with an .844 OPS. So I think that Verdugo is a very big bright spot in the outfield. Hunter Renfroe does bring a pretty heavy bat for the most part. And I will say, in the Andrew Benintendi trade, they might have found a gem, in my opinion, in Franchi Cordero. He's got a lot of pop in his bat. I know he did not have much time in Kansas City. He was injured here and there. But when he was with the San Diego Padres, he did put on, I would say, a pretty solid, showing for the most part. And I think that's, again, a big sign to kind of look at. So I do wonder how they're going to adjust to not having as much outfield hitting as they've had in the past. And I think that, Renfroe hitting 156 last year and slugging .393, and that's not good. That is not good at all. Eventually he got DFA'd by the Tampa Bay Race, got designated for assignment, and as a result, he wasn't really doing a whole lot. So, and not to mention, he's terrible against righties in his career. He does pretty well against lefties, but he bats .216 in his career against lefties versus bats .216 against righties in his career and bats .258 against lefties in his career. So a big difference between lefties and righties for Renfroe, and I just don't know if that's what they need. I think they needed somebody a little bit more consistent, a little bit more reliable, and ultimately I just think this is an outfield that they'll be good maybe in a few years, but right now I don't think it's going to be anything that's that spectacular. I think that, obviously them knowing that JBJ was going to be a free agent, they went out and grabbed a decent outfielder for a good price, which, let's face it, money's never an issue for Boston, right? I don't think anybody can disagree with that. They've got one of the highest payrolls in all of baseball. They spend some of the most amount of money on their players, so going out and spending money was not going to be an issue. And maybe what they're trying to do is say, hey, we can try and get these quality guys, these productive guys for a low price, maybe build the team up a little bit and hope that one of them has a really good breakout season and we could use them as trade bait. That would be a strategy that I would personally use. Just, hey, you know what, we'll sign you for a 2-year deal or a 1-year deal, give you kind of $8 to $10 million for a year or give you $12 million for 2 years, whatever it might be. And if you have a really good season after the first year, maybe you try and trade them and get some other pieces. But ultimately, I think there were some moves that should have been made by certain teams, and they weren't, unfortunately. But nonetheless, we're going to have to just see how it plays out this year because, again, we've got baseball in less than a month, folks, so it's going to be coming up very, very quickly. So we'll find out very soon how these off-season or lack of off-season moves by these teams kind of, turn out and pan out this upcoming season. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. But coming up after the commercial, I'm going to select which free agents on new teams I think will have huge seasons and really have the best seasons they've had in quite some time for their new ball clubs, but also for the value that they bring to their teams. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we have a lot more to go. So don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I jumped into discussing what moves I think some teams should have made and how I think they might have missed out on this past offseason. But I want to now get into which free agent players I think will have the best seasons on their new respective teams and could thrive for their new ball clubs. But more importantly, they could bring the most amount of value with the skill set they bring to the team that they are currently on. So this is not necessarily, the George Springers of the world and the JT Realmutos and this, that, and the other. These are guys that are still good players for the most part. They're not superstars, but they're good players that should be respected a little bit more. And they bring a lot of value to a team that clearly, I think, needs their abilities and their talents on their roster to make them a very, at least, respectable baseball team. So first, I want to get into David Dahl with the Texas Rangers now. Used to be with the Colorado Rockies. I think this is a player that has been gradually building up to having a really, really good career. Again, I don't know if he's necessarily going to ever be an MVP candidate, but I mean, he's got a lot of time to kind of figure that one out. I mean, he's only been in the league for about 4 years now. He missed 2017 with an injury. He's had a little bit of an injury issue in previous years in his career, especially last season. But when he was a rookie in only 63 games, he batted .315. He batted .273 in 2018, and then he had a career high in 2019 at .302. So he had a very, very good, solid run in Colorado. He was an all-star in 2019. And this is, I mean, his career WAR is not great. It's right at 1, but he still has a lot of upside to him as a hitter, and one of many lefties in this Rangers lineup. So I think that could also be a major issue for a lot of right-handed starters, that they've got just another formidable lefty to have to go up against, and somebody that I think that could really do a lot of damage. I think that, with a full season and a healthy year for him as well, he can definitely have a big bounce-back season, and possibly he could be one of the best performers to come from this free agency market. And he's also in a weaker division. I mean, he's on a team that, or he's the only team in the AL to actually finish in the West, in the AL West to finish in the top 10 for ERA as a team was the A's. So they only had one team in the division last year that was any good at pitching, and that was the Oakland Athletics. Every other team was 13th or lower. So right there, that tells you he's not going to necessarily be challenged, I would say, so much, and I think that he's going to actually have a lot easier of time hitting and being successful in Texas than he might have had in the NL West. I won't say that he'll be an MVP, but an all-star, yeah, I could see that absolutely happening. I think he'll be a huge, huge get for them in the long run because he brings a lot of hitting to this lineup. They need hitting. I mean, they had numerous guys that hit below 200 on their starting lineup. Below 200, not even just below 250, but below 200. And I think you put him and Joey Gallo, two really good left-handed hitters, on the same lineup. You could also spread them out a little bit. You can space them out throughout the lineup. So that's going to just add a little bit more depth for this team. And I think that David Dahl, I remember when I saw him get signed by the Rangers, and my immediate reaction was, now that is a great move. That is going to be something that pays off, I think. And honestly, I hope that I'm not wrong, because I would really love to see Dahl have a turnaround season after 2020 where he did not play well. He did have some injuries he had to battle through, so I would like to see him kind of get back to his 29 self. But then another move that was very quiet, honestly. I'm kind of shocked I did not see this one. Very under the radar, Derek Dietrich going to the New York Yankees. And this is an interesting pick because, well, he's a home run hitter, plain and simple. And when you're playing for the Bronx Bombers, that's going to help you out a big time, big time. And now I know a lot of people are probably confused on why I picked him. But let's remember that he's going to be playing in the AL for the first time in his career. He's never played in the AL before. He's always been an NL guy. So as a result, he's always had to play in the field and hit. And like I mentioned in my first segment, there are guys out there, and I even mentioned a little bit in my second segment, there are guys out there that have really excelled and have succeeded at a very high level when they've just gone straight to DHing, and they've gone completely away from playing both in the field and at the plate, and they just strictly stick to hitting. They've seen an incredible jump in their career. So Derek Dietrich, I think, is a prime candidate to be somebody that could be a DH, an effective DH, somebody that puts up a lot of runs, and not to mention it's just another home run hitter on this lineup that's got Gary Sanchez, who, like I mentioned, already has had a 2-run homer in this spring training so far. You've got a guy like Aaron Judge. You've got a guy like Giancarlo Stanton. You've got guys like Gio Urshela. And you've got guys that can all hit the ball long, far, and hard. And I think that Derek Dietrich does that exact same thing. So a very wise move by Brian Cashman to go out and get him. And like I said, he can DH finally. So I think that he could slide right on into the DH. Oh, and how could I forget Luke Voigt as well? So that's another home run hitter. That could be a huge, huge guy that Derek Dietrich kind of takes a little bit of the attention away from. And Derek Dietrich is going to then, I think as a result, have a little bit more media towards him. And he's a guy that, I mean, he's a fiery player. He likes to play with a lot of passion and a lot of just aggressiveness. You can tell just when he's up at bat, he has no problem staring down a batter or staring down a pitcher, whatever it might be. And I think that attitude kind of works well with this Yankees team, right? And so I think that he might mesh very well with this team. In the last 2 years, he's been injury-ridden. There's no question about that. And he's batted below 200 in each of those last 2 years. But in the last 6 years, he's at least a 750 OPS or higher, and he's only had one season in the last 6 years where his OPS plus wasn't above 100. So right there, that tells me this guy can definitely hit, and he can hit for a lot of power. And I don't think he's going to be an all-star, but for a lineup that, again, features guys like Giancarlo Stanton, Judge, Voigt, Sanchez, he's a nice fifth option, and not to mention a very ideal DH candidate. So I think that he could actually be a ginormous addition for them as we get into the season, and he clearly has a high strikeout potential. That is one of the big issues with him. He had a career-high 28% K rate in 2020, but his home run percentage was also a career high in 2020 at 6.7%, and his walk percentage was also the highest it's been in his career at 12%. It had actually never been in the double-digit range before that. So, although his strikeouts are up, his walks and his home runs are up. And now, again, I'm going to keep saying it over and over again. He's in the AL. He can DH. And as a result, I think that's going to make his life a lot easier because he can just focus on hitting. So I think Derek Dietrich is going to be a really pleasant surprise for the New York Yankees. But then another guy that I felt was a great addition for this team was Adam Duvall, getting picked up by the Miami Marlins. And what I like about this is the power potential he brings to Miami. Miami ranked 23rd in team OPS in 2020, and Duvall, he's been above 800 the last 2 years. He's also put up 30-plus home run numbers in his career before. He hit 33 in 2016, and he hit 31 in 2017. He was an all-star in 2016. So he's got a lot of potential. And this is a Marlins team that when you look at their team, nobody really, I would say, jumps out at you. Jesus Aguilar, sure, he's a big power guy, I'll give you that. You've also got guys like Starling Marte, sure, he's got a little bit of pop in his bat, and he's a good center fielder. But somebody that is a strict power hitter and somebody that brings a ton of pop and somebody that really will produce a lot of offensive runs, that was another thing. This Miami team, I felt, they won a lot of the times on good defense, great pitching, and just barely getting by with the hitting. And now they've got a guy that I think, like Duvall, who can put some separation between them and other teams when it's a close ball game. And they clearly need that power bat. And Duvall was a cheap pickup for them, so they could have probably, gotten a big bang for their buck there with getting somebody who has a lot of potential, a high ceiling, but you didn't have to pay, an arm and a leg for him. And Miami had only one player in double-digit figures for home runs last year. And in all honesty, Duvall, he would have led the team in the category. He had about 16 homers, I believe, so he had a huge season from the plate, and he's clearly a massive addition. I mean, this Miami team, I felt that they were not really making any moves towards bettering that roster, that lineup per se, but then going out and getting Duvall, I think that was a great step in the right direction. And not to mention, again, I think he could be one of the best players on their new respective teams this year for the value he brings, because he brings a lot of power, and that is what Miami is missing. Just like Derek Dietrich, they probably need somebody at the DH position because you've got Sanchez behind the plate, you've got Voit at first, and honestly, Dietrich could also spell Voit for a little bit at first if need be. So that's another good thing about it. And then David Dahl, he's a guy that there's no question that the Rangers need hitting. They want to add more lefty hitting, and that's what they did. They went out, and that's the value that Dahl brings, and I think he could be one of the best players in free agency for that value. So far, those guys I think are really big gets, but getting into the last couple guys, this one is, I think, one of the most necessary moves that had to have been made for a team in all of baseball because of just how atrocious their outfield was, and that's the Cleveland Indians going out and getting Ben Gamel. Gamel had a pretty successful run in Milwaukee. I will give him that. It was more so in kind of a reserve role, and so I think that in Cleveland he's going to step up into a starter's role more so. And this team flat out needs hitting in the outfield. I mean, this is, besides Eddie Rosario as that main addition that they had in the outfield, losing Francisco Lindor, that's a big loss. That's a huge hole that they'll have in their lineup. And so I think that they needed to go out and address some outfield hitting. And this is an outfielder that, he's proven himself before. In all honesty, last year the Indians, they were fourth. They had the fourth lowest OPS by an outfield. So their outfield was the fourth lowest OPS across the board in all of major leagues. Jordan Luplow, he was dismal. I mean, he did not have a very, very good year at all. And he actually, funny enough, even though he did not have a good year, he had the highest OPS out of all of the outfielders on the Indians at a 663 clip, where Ben Gamel, he's a career 720 guy. So almost a whole 100 points higher in his career. And Gamel probably would have been easily the leader in OPS in the outfield last year. He also brings a good glove, and I think that also will fit their needs. They clearly wanted to bring in some fielding because they lose a guy like Lindor who's got a great glove. You don't have Carlos Santana there anymore, so you lose some patience at the plate. And I think that you could, even though Gamel right now I feel like might start, he could be a great reserve guy. He could be somebody that comes off the bench for them and is that spark that, in a close ball game, in the bottom of the inning, pinch hits and he gets a huge single or he gets a huge walk or whatever it might be. That's what Ben Gamel will do for you. And I think that He's going to bring some life to that outfield. Eddie Rosario clearly will also, but I think Ben Gamel was a sneaky, really good get for them. And I'm not saying he'll be an all-star either, but he could be a very, very solid player for a team that could actually, and he could even be the tipping point that makes this team a solid competitor in the AL Central as well. So I'm going to be paying close attention to kind of how things work out in Cleveland with Ben Gamel and how he's going to progress and if he can actually have the impact that I think he will be, because I genuinely think he could be one of the best players to come out of this free agency market in terms of what the value he brings. He brings some power hitting that outfield, and they need that desperately. They had a negative win-aboves replacement last year. They had a negative wins above average last year in the outfield for Cleveland, minus 3.3, the second lowest in all of Major League. So they are going to definitely need to heighten that outfield in some way, somehow, and they clearly did that with getting Gamel. So the next guy I want to discuss, Jeremy Jeffries. I think Jeffries is going to be a big-time, addition, add, get, whatever you want to call it for the Washington Nationals, because he's one of the best setup guys in baseball, in my opinion. He was one of the top setup guys when he was in Milwaukee. He's coming off a year where he had a 1.54 ERA in 23 and a third innings. He had a 292 ERA plus, not to mention he was up for the NL Reliever of the Year award. So he has, I think, a great track record that he brings to Washington. And this was a bullpen that needed a makeover. I mean, they needed that desperately. Tanner Rainey and Kyle Finnegan were the only relievers last year for the Nationals that had under a 3 ERA. No one else was under 2. So Jeffries would have led the team in that category. And when you've got a closer in Daniel Hudson that had over a 6 ERA, I can see why they wanted to go out and get Brad Hand, but I can really see now why they went out and got Jeffries, because they need a good setup guy to kind of lay the groundwork for Brad Hand when he comes in. Now, Jeffries was signed to a minor league deal, so the Nats only have one remaining spot on their roster. Jeffries, I think, could definitely get it. I would be shocked if he didn't, and in all honesty, I've seen a lot of things where they actually might go with 8 relievers coming out of the pen this year, so they might try and expand that roster a little bit, but if not, they're definitely going to try and add, I think, an extra arm coming out of the pen. And Jeffries was incredible in terms of barrel per batted ball rate. He was in the 91st percentile at a 3.5%, so guys are not making good contact when he's in the game at all. He's not a guy that's going to have a huge fly ball rate. He's going to be a ground ball guy. He's going to make them have to hit the ball on the ground, and as a result, they're not going to get great launch angle, they're not going to get great elevation, and they're not going to be able to barrel up balls. And as a result, I think it's going to do a lot of wonders for this Nationals bullpen, especially in the division they're in. I mean, let's face it, there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to have really high, barrel rates in the NL East this year, a lot of big-time hitters, and I think that getting a guy like Jeffries who really limits that and really forces guys to struggle from the plate, and especially in making solid contact, I think that was a very smart move for the Nationals. And now his fastball has seen a little bit of a dip, I will say that, but he's been using his splitter much more, and he's limited opposing batters to a sub-200 average when he's used both pitches last year. So even though his fastball dipped down, he's still getting guys out. And using a splitter, using more of kind of a widespread repertoire of pitching, I think is going to make him an even better pitcher. And in all honesty, I think it could expand his game a little bit. And although he's been in the league for quite some time, I think he's got a little bit of time left in him, and this is going to be an interesting Nationals team to watch, and so I think we should pay close attention to Jeffries, because I think he could be, again, one of the really, really high points in this free agency market in terms of what he brings to that team, because this was a move that I think a lot of teams probably would have wanted to make, and the Nationals were just the first ones to do it. So the last guy I want to discuss that I think could be arguably one of the best players out of this, free agency market based on the value he brings. Again, and I'm going to keep reiterating that, because it's not necessarily the George Springers and the James McCanns and the Marcelo Zunas and this, that, and the other. It's not necessarily that. It's what these guys bring to the table for this team, for their respective teams, and what those respective teams are lacking, and why they had to go out and get those players. So Tommy La Stella for the Giants does a lot of different things. One of the things is this. This is a team that is going to be losing quite a bit of their infield in the next couple years, if not in the next year. Brandon Crawford will be up for free agency. Same thing with Brandon Belt. So they need somebody in the outfield in the infield to change things up a little bit, to kind of give them a little bit of a cushion before they can bring up other guys, so they can go out and get guys that will be there for the long haul. And this is, I think, one of the biggest, pickups from the free agency market, kind of ironically, if you will, because he was one of the best pickups in the trade deadline. Last year, when he went from the Angels to the Athletics, he went from hitting .273 in L.A. to .289 in Oakland. So even though he was hitting well, he still had a huge jump in production. And I think that he's a guy that can play all over the infield. He's very versatile. You can put him at third. You can put him at second. You can put him at short. I was reading something that they actually might now move Donovan Solano back to the bench and in a reserve role. And I think that's foolish. I think that they should put Solano and Tommy La Stella out there. Donovan Solano had a tremendous year last year. He was one of the best hitters in the NL West. And I think that, obviously La Stella won't bring a whole lot of, power. But again, it's just his consistency that he brings. He will come to the ballpark every single day ready to go, and he's going to bring a lot of energy. But more importantly, he can do a lot of different things. He can field, he can hit, he can throw. You can put him anywhere in the in the infield, and I think that could actually help them fix their issues for next year. It could maybe give them a cushion and give them a little bit of time until they kind of figure out where they want to go in the infield, because the clock is ticking for them, right? I mean, we already know that there's going to be guys that are going to be off the team. This is not necessarily the team of the early 2010s anymore, and I think that they're trying to rebuild, and they're trying to kind of get back to where they were before. And I think Tommy La Stella might be a piece that could really help them in the long run. He could be a guy that, kind of is almost this David Freese-esque like player that is a huge impact at the best time possible, and you didn't really get him for much, right? And he's one of the biggest, bang for your bucks, if you will, in free agency. So I think that this is a tremendous get for the Giants. I'm really excited to kind of see how he fares in San Francisco, somebody that has been in the AL West a lot, not necessarily in the NL West, so it'll be interesting to see how he adjusts to all of that strong pitching that there is in that division. But ultimately, there's a lot of guys that I think, we are not really paying attention to, but they could be some of the best gets from the free agency market because of how much they will help their new teams, the value that they bring, the impact that they bring, and also what those teams were missing. Right? I mean, the Marlins, for example, missing that power hitting. You go out and get Duvall, 1 year, $5 million deal. I mean, how much more perfect can you get? So I think this is going to be an interesting season to see how some of these guys really fare in their new teams and if they can actually be those impact players. So that'll do it for this segment, folks, but thanks for sticking around as always. Stay right there because we will be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll get into what moves teams might regret making in the long run and which moves could actually come back to bite some squads as the year goes on. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer is still with you. In the previous segment, I jumped into sharing which players from free agency are going to have the best seasons with the value they bring to their new team, but I want to now discuss which moves I think could be big-time regrets for certain teams and which moves they might wish they didn't make once the season does start and we get into kind of the thick of the season and kind of into, the regular season play as we go down towards the season, because there was a lot of moves that were very, very, very big-time head-scratchers for me. I felt that there are some players that might be getting second, third, fourth chances that should not be getting second, third, fourth chances. And as a result, I think that they could be moves that, we could see these guys going down to the minors. We could see these guys getting released. We could see these guys getting traded because they're just not going to pan out in my personal opinion. So the first guy I want to discuss is Mike Fultonevich going to the Rangers. I remember when this happened, right? I remember when they got Chris Davis. I said, that's a great get. David Dahl, that's a great get. Mike Fultonevich, though, not a big fan of it. I'm not a big fan of it because the Rangers' pitching is already thin. You're getting a guy that has been injury-ridden the last couple years. He has not been good since 2018. That was the last time he was an all-star, and that was the last time he was good. And since then, his ERA has skyrocketed. I mean, last year, he had a 16 ERA. He only got one start. His ERA was so bad after that one start that they wound up sending him to the spring training or the summer training, whatever you want to call it, the training facility down in Florida, and he pretty much just stayed down there and worked out for the rest of the summer. So he was that bad. He pretty much was gone after one game, one start. And I just feel like this Rangers team, if they want to be competitive, they should not be getting these, I hate to say it, but these has-beens, these washed-up players that are just not any good anymore. And I think that Fultonevich is a guy that has unfortunately suffered due to some injuries over the last few years. He's had some shoulder problems, and as a result, I think that he should not have been an option for them. And I don't really see why they went out and got somebody like that when there were plenty of other guys out on the market, and they went out and got him of all people. And again, I know I sound like I'm absolutely roasting the guy, but when you've got such a bad ERA after one game that you get booted down to the training facility, I don't think that's a good, positive sign and not a great kind of highlight, if you will, right? I mean, that's a huge red flag, and I felt that the Rangers, for those two great moves they made, it was kind of a 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and so you're pretty much back where you started. And I just felt that they needed to go out and get some better pitching, and Fultonevich was not that, especially as a starter. So that's one move I could see the Rangers really regretting and kind of saying, why do we go in this direction? I think that we'll eventually see him getting DFA'd, in all honesty, or released. I don't see him finishing the season, and I could be wrong. He could have an incredible season this year. This could be kind of the revitalization of Mike Fultonevich in Texas, but I just don't see that happening. So that's a move I think the Rangers are going to regret big time. Another move is the Giants getting Curt Casali. I think this is a big regret, and here's why. This is my concern. Let's say Buster Posey doesn't show up to spring, or doesn't show up during the season, right? Let's say he decides to opt out. He doesn't want to play. The COVID issue is still roaring through, and he's not very comfortable playing. And then you've got a guy like Joey Bart who's coming off a year where he did not play well. And in all honesty, I don't think there was a whole lot of expectations for Bart, because I think he kind of got thrown into the mix at the last minute. Posey not playing, and now he doesn't have that guidance to kind of follow around in the locker room and in the dugout and so on and so forth. And now it kind of, I think, let Bart fend for himself a little bit. I will say, though, that might have allowed him to grow a little bit as a player and mature and know the ropes of the Major League world without having somebody to, I would say, usher him in. But I think that having Posey there is going to do wonders for his career down the road. But the point I make about Curt Casali is this. If Buster Posey's not on the team, or let's say he doesn't play well, and then Joey Bart, they go to him and he's not playing well, Curt Casali's the third option. And they might be left with just Curt Casali, especially if Posey's not on the team. And I think that is another big kind of eyebrow raiser, because he's never played a full season of baseball. Curt Casali has only played at the most 84 games in his career. So he has played the similar size or the similar kind of most amount of games played that a guy like Fernando Tatis has played. I believe Tatis has only played in 84 games at the most in his career so far, and Casali has been in the league for 4 years more than Tatis has. So he has not had a whole lot of repetition, especially with him potentially becoming a starting catcher this year if things kind of do fall by the wayside for San Francisco. Now, he's put up good numbers when he's played in 50-plus games, right? In the 52 games in 2018, batted .293. But then once you kind of see his numbers go and kind of see his game, the amount of games he's playing increase, that's when you start to see the average dip down. 2016, he only played in 84 games, batted .186. 2019, played in 84 games, batted .251. So an improvement, but nonetheless, still not a great average to have. Nothing to gloat about. And so I do wonder if Casali is going to be a guy that they regret getting, because they might have him as their only option and their only reliable option. And as a result, I don't think that that's going to do great things for them in the long run. I think that that could actually hurt them more, because let's face it, it won't be an extra bat that they can go to in the lineup, and who knows how he'll be behind the plate. So I don't know if he'll be able to shoulder the load hitting-wise, and especially for a team that was top 5 in hitting a year ago that did a great job from the plate. I just don't think Casali is going to be a move that they look back with fond memories, and I think that it might be a move that they kind of regret down the road. So another team, and this is my favorite team, and so I'm going to really sound off, if you will, on this one. Travis Shaw getting signed to a minor league deal with the Milwaukee Brewers. Zero clue why they even entertained this idea. I have no idea. I still have no idea. I remember a couple days when it happened, about 2 weeks ago or whenever it might have been, I remember sitting there and saying, why in the world did we go out and get a guy that his last year with us batted below 200, right? I mean, he has literally batted below 240 the last 2 years of his career. And the best season that he's had was in Milwaukee, his first season there when he batted 273. But that was 4 years ago, right? So that's a little bit of old news. I think that, there could be a lot of other guys that could have gone out and gotten at third base. Again, Maikel Franco, I don't know why he has not been signed yet. He had a great year in Kansas City. I think he's a very, very, I don't know if I should say underappreciated or undervalued, but just not kind of an underdog of a third baseman, and I think that he should be given a little bit more of credit. He's a very good third baseman. He's a very good hitter, and I think that he would have been way better at third for the Brewers than Travis Shaw. Travis Shaw, in my opinion, should not be on a major league roster right now. That's just my opinion. I will say he does provide some power for you. I mean, but he hasn't been above an 800 OPS since 2018. But from 2015 to 2018, he did have 3 years where he was above an 800 OPS. So he can bring a little bit of pop to the lineup. And this is a team that is lacking in pop. They did not have a whole lot of power hitting from other guys last year. Keston Hiura did not have a good year. Christian Yelich was atrocious. Orlando Arcia, he was average at best. Avisail Garcia, he was average at best. They did not have a whole lot of hitting across the board. Now you get Colton Wong. Christian Yelich is back. Keston Hiura has been playing well as of lately, right now in spring training. But I just don't think that Travis Shaw's a move that, we might not even see Travis Shaw make the roster. We might not even see him get called up at all during the season. I would not be shocked about that. And quite frankly, I don't know if I would be that upset about it because, again, I do not think that Travis Shaw should have been signed. And I remember them seeing, the Brewers being in the news about getting Justin Turner. I saw things about Jackie Bradley Jr. possibly landing on the Brewers. So there was a lot of other possibilities that I felt that were out there. And to the life of me, I don't understand why they did not go out and pursue that because, let's face it, again, the Brewers need hitting. They desperately need that. And I know that last year was a little bit of an odd year, so we can't really fault them completely. But at the same time, is Shaw really what you need? Do you really need a slow third baseman with, an average glove? He's got an okay glove. He's got a pretty good arm. But a non-existent bat? I don't see that. I don't like that. That doesn't sit well with me. So that's a move I think that they're going to really regret. And quite frankly, again, I don't know if we'll even see Travis Shaw make the roster this year, let alone even be, called up at all. So the next guy I want to get into is Hunter Renfroe to the Red Sox. And this might be out of all of the players and out of all the teams that I mentioned on this list that are going to regret the moves that they've made. This might be the one that is maybe an exception. Maybe. And that's a big maybe. He's he's an interesting case because he's a guy that has a lot of power in his bat. He belts a ton of home runs. In 2017, he had 26 homers, and he had 26 homers in 2018. And then he had 33 in 2019. So he had 3 straight years of 25-plus homers and like 80 or 90-plus RBIs. But at the same time, let's see what they lost in the outfield. You don't re-sign Jackie Bradley Jr. You gave Andrew Benintendi, I think, one too many shots at trying to be good, and he just did not come through in that situation. And so I wonder if they're going to do the same thing with Hunter Renfroe. If they're going to give him time and time again, and if he's not going to be productive, if he's not going to be, what they expect him to be. And I will say, even though that he's been, a solid home run hitter for the most part, his home run percentage has dwindled down over the years, and his K percentage is right around 30% for a career. It's right at 28%. So, his numbers are not necessarily trending in a great direction, and so that is a little bit of a worrisome thing for me. And not to mention, he batted below 200 last year, right? And that is something that is horrifying. He wound up getting, again, demoted during November in the playoffs by the Rays. So this is a guy that I think is a little bit of a head-scratcher. He could be good. He could pay off for them. But I really do kind of question why they went and got him, and I do see his numbers trending continuously down that direction, and I think that even though he's got a lot of power potential, this might be a regret the Red Sox make. And I hate to say that, but I definitely think they'll look back at that move and say, why did we do that? So the last two guys I want to discuss, they're still coming from the AL East. Honestly, there was a lot of teams in the AL East that made some questionable moves, I felt. They were not on top of their game as they usually are, as I would like to say. So first one, before I get into the last one, Jameson Taillon to the Yankees. Again, and I've said this a million times, we've barely seen him the last 2 years. We have barely seen him pitch. He's barely really, I feel, scratched the surface of the amount of time that he's spent in the major leagues. He's only had 2 years where he's had 20-plus starts. He's had one season where he was below a 4 ERA. So I would not say that he's been lights out incredible, right? I mean, you see guys that have been injury-ridden the last few years, kind of like Corey Kluber. But he had a lot that had been proven by him, winning 2 Cy Youngs, being one of the best pitchers for 4 or 5 straight years. So I understand that move. The Taillon move, I don't get. And I think that he's going to be somebody that they look back at and say, again, what in the world were we thinking getting Taillon? I know the Pirates were very high up on him. He was a guy that a lot of people in the organization really liked. A lot of fans really liked him. A lot of media personalities around here and journalists and broadcasters and radio show hosts, they all really liked him. But I just personally did not understand what in the world the big hype was about him, because every time I ever watched him, he was okay, and then he would miss 60 games after that. And then he would come back and he'd pitch 2 weeks, and then he would miss another 35 games. So it's like, okay, is this guy going to even show up? Is he even going to be healthy the entirety of the season? So I think that, getting Kluber was one thing. I think that he's a little bit more proven, and so I get why they were going in that direction. But getting a guy like Taillon, I just don't understand it, and I think they're going to really regret that move. So the last move I want to touch on is Michael Wacha to the Rays. Now, this might be the biggest regret of them all. In my opinion, I think that this is the move, next to the Rangers getting Mike Fultonevich, that they really look back at and say, we messed up on that one. We dropped the ball massively. He has not been trending in the right direction for years. The first 3 seasons of his career, he was great. Had a sub 3.5 ERA, but ever since then, he's been 3.5 and below only one time since 2016. 2015 seemed to be kind of the peak for him. He was an all-star then, but then after that, and just the continuous losses that the Rays have endured in this past offseason, I don't see the point of bringing somebody like Wacha there, right? I don't get why you go out and get him. He was not good last year, and he's clearly not going in, again, the right direction, and it shows. He had a sub-500 winning percentage the last 2 years. His numbers have overall dipped some. I will say, very contrary to kind of how Hunter Renfroe is kind of trending in the wrong direction overall, Wacha might be going in the other direction. I will give him that. His K percentage was the second highest in his career this past year at 23.7, but his OPS against him for opponents was a staggering 951, and it's increased each year from 2018 to 2020. So that is something that's horrifying. You have a guy that is, yes, he's improving on his strikeout rate, but opposing batters are absolutely raking on him, and they are having a field day doing it. And so if you're the Rays and you're going up against a team like the Yankees that are very stacked, why are you getting a guy like Wacha that is probably going to get rocked, in my opinion? And I just think that this is another guy that, he could find himself getting sent down to the minors at one point or another during the year. I just don't see him being the player that they are expecting him to be. I don't see him being anything special, right? I mean, they went out and kind of got the Walmart version, if you will, of what they had before the rotation, right? They had just a fraction of it. They did not have guys that I think could replace or come close to replacing Charlie Morton or Blake Snell. Now, obviously you have Ryan Yarbrough back and you have Tyler Glasnow, but is Chris Archer your answer? Is Michael Wacha your answer? I don't think so. I think both of those guys, I will give them this. Archer, I think, will have a little bit more success because some of the best years came with him being in the Rays uniform, so that might revitalize him a little bit and kind of get him back to where he was before. But Wacha's not going in the right direction. And I know that the K percentage is one thing, but the OPS against and the average against and all of those numbers, they are just increasing each and every year. And it's kind of like, why in the world would you even entertain that? So overall, I think there's going to be a lot of moves that these teams are going to regret and that some, organizations are probably going to regret more than others. And quite frankly, I think we'll see some of these guys winding up on either minor league teams, being DFA'd or being released, or even just being traded overall. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. And I appreciate you all listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd really appreciate that. As always, everybody, thanks so much for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.